This tutorial is for those of you who may have recently purchased Studio One through the holiday sales and you'd like to get a jump start on how to navigate within the song page of Studio One and figure out where everything is that you need to use in order to create your music. So the first thing that we're going to do is press Shift and F to make Studio One full screen. And before we get started, just know that I do provide one-on-one web training. You can find out more information on that in the pinned comment below or the description area of this video. And without that out of the way, let's go ahead and get our bearings on where everything is here. So we've got several main areas, and in the center we have our arrange view. And this is going to be where our MIDI and audio is going to be displayed when we record or bring in from the browser. So this is that arrange area here in the center. And then over to the left, we have a track column. Over to the right, we have our browser. At the bottom, we have our transport controls for stop, play, record, and so on. And up at the very top, we have our tools. So these are all of the main areas, although we do have some other panels that are hidden at the moment. And also at the bottom, we'll have some panels here. If we click on the mix button in the bottom right corner here, we can see our mix console. We'll come back to that. And then we have our edit view, which we can use to edit audio and MIDI parts with a larger view. And we'll also come back to that in just a moment. So let's just start at the top here with our tools. Now we can, of course, click on these to select, and we can see that here is going to change in our arrange view. We now have this mute tool that's active. Just know that these are all tied into the number keys at the top of your QWERTY keyboard. So when I press 1, then that's going to switch to the arrow tool. 2 will be the range tool, 3 is our split tool, and 4 the eraser, and so on. Now next to that, we have some other buttons here where we can access different panels. So this is going to be our macro or bin panel rather. This is going to be for warping our audio or stretching and compressing our audio. We then have a strip silence panel, which is going to automatically remove silent areas of your recordings. We then have our quantize panel, and this ties in with the smaller quantize panel up at the top here. So we can see that our quantize is set to 16th note here. We can see 16th note here. So if I click here and change to 8th, we can see that that changes. If I click on the drop-down menu, we can change to quarter note, then that changes as well. And these changes will be reflected in our grid lines here. So we can see that we have 4 lines representing our quarter notes. If I come back to the 8th note, then we can see that that changes to reflect that as well. Now I would need to left click, hold, and zoom in a little bit, and now we're going to populate those 8th note subdivisions. So this is set to adaptive, and that's part of the reason why those grid lines are going to change based on our zoom level. Now next in line, we have our macro panel, and this is going to allow us to access buttons that actually combine multiple actions into one to help you work a bit more quickly. We then have an input quantize, so when we're recording MIDI, then it's going to be automatically quantized to whatever value that you have set here. Okay, now here we have our snap. We can toggle that on and off, and basically when we're working with audio events or MIDI parts, it's going to snap to the grid lines that we have set here, whatever value we've chosen. The snap is also going to affect some of our tools as well. Now next in line, we have the ripple edit. We then have auto scroll, and we have cursor follows edit position. We've got auto zoom, and if I left click and hold, we have several different modes for that. We then have a video player. So if we're going to compose to video, we can open that up there. And then here we have our launcher. And this is a relatively new feature where we can launch clips from here and use this to arrange our songs. Now your section up top here is going to look a little bit different than mine probably, especially if you're just coming to Studio One. And the reason for that is if I right click here in an empty area, we have customize. Now I'll go ahead and click on that, and here I have set my own default for what's going to display here with the browser tabs for the inspector and the transport and so on. Now if I click on this, I can choose complete. Now we can see we have more controls in our tools section as well as the transport below. So I'm actually going to leave this here, but just know that you can customize what's going to be displayed in Studio One by clicking on this menu here. If I choose basic, we can see that that's parsed back a bit more. We've got minimal, and we've got audio editing. And then of course you can come in and select the different tabs here for Toolbar, Inspector, Transport, and make your own selections based on what you would like to see within the song page here. So we'll come back to the complete view and we'll close this out. Just know that if I right click in an empty area down below in our transport, we have that same customize here. If I right click on a tab, we have that there. And then if I come over to the eye and open up our inspector, I can right click and access that here as well. Okay, let's go ahead and close out that inspector. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Okay, now over to the right, and actually let's talk about these up at the top first here. We have this little house icon, and if I click on this, this is going to take us back to the song page. So if we'd like to ever come back here while we're working on a track, then we can just click on that house icon. Our song that we created at the beginning of this tutorial is still active, and we know that because we have this paper icon that's highlighted in white. So I can just click on this, and then we switch back to that song. We can have multiple songs open in Studio One. Then we're going to see a stack of pages here, and we can click on this, and we'll access a drop-down menu where we can choose between multiple songs that may be open. Okay, so now let's move on to the browser. Now we can resize this like so. We can also click on this upward-facing arrow and detach that. We can also resize. Now we can click on the downward-facing arrow to put that back. Now up at the top, we have different tabs, and these work in tandem with the links here. So here we have instruments. If I click on that, we can see that that tab becomes active. We then have our effects, and these are going to be grouped by vendor by default. We then have our loops, our files where we can navigate our system directory and even set up links to our own personal sample library and navigate within there. We have the cloud where we can access the Presonus Exchange, the Studio One Pro, the SoundCloud. We then have the shop, and then we have the pool, which is going to be a central repository for any audio that we may have recorded or imported from an external folder. So let's come back to the Instruments tab, and as you already may know, many things in Studio One are drag and drop. So if I'd like to bring an instrument into our song, a virtual instrument, I can click on the Presonus here, and then let's left click, hold, and drag that MyTie in, and notice that a track is automatically created once we drag this in. Let's go ahead and close out the browser for now, and I'm going to press Shift and E to zoom in on this. Shift and E zooms in vertically, Shift and W will zoom out vertically. So once we've brought this in, we should be able to immediately play this with a MIDI controller. I actually don't have mine connected at the moment, but I'll press Caps Lock to bring up the virtual QWERTY keyboard. And we can hear that that is playing back. I'll caps lock again to close that. Let's close out our instrument, and just know that anytime that you would like to access your virtual instruments, then we can click on this little keyboard icon here to view its controls once again. We can also click again to hide that like so. Now what about audio? If we would like to record audio, I can press T, and then we have the Add Tracks dialog. This is going to go to audio by default. We can also select instrument and manually add an instrument track. That will not have an instrument attached to it when we use that method, unless we come down below and choose one. We then have automation and folder track, but let's come to the audio. We can input a name. We can input 1, 2, 3, or however many tracks that we'd like. We can have auto color. We can choose the format. I'm going to leave this on mono. And then we can also select the input here. So let's go ahead and click on OK. We can see our audio track has been added. I can then click on the record arm button and then press record. Let's take this out of monitoring. And then we can see that I'm now recording audio. This is pulling from the laptop microphones on my laptop. Let's press the space bar to stop. And so now we have an audio event with that recording. Now, typically I'll use my audio interface to do this, and this waveform will be a little bit larger, so this level is a little bit low. But we can come to the top here, and I can left click hold, and I'll just drag this up. This is increasing the gain of that recording. So now that we have an audio event, we can click once to select that, and then if I come to edit, as we mentioned earlier, we can open up this edit window, hover at its border and resize, and do some editing to our audio down below. We've got tools here. These pretty much match with what's up above. We can again use our number keys to change. So 2 is the range and so on. Now just note that we are missing actually we're not missing anything here because we're working with audio. But if I were to double click up above and create a MIDI part, this is automatically created once you record MIDI, but we can also double click to manually add that. So while that's selected, our edit view changes to this. And now for our MIDI, we can see that we're missing the range tool up above. So these are going to be a little bit different. So 2 is going to be our split tool, 3 the paint, and so on. So clicking on our events up above, we now have our MIDI part selected. So we see our MIDI editor with the piano view, or if I click once on our audio, then we switch to the audio editor. Let's go ahead and click on the edit to hide that view. And I'm going to press comma to take our playback cursor to the beginning of our song. And let's hop over to the inspector and take a look at that. So in the top left corner, we have this little eye, and if I click on that, then we're going to see more information and controls for the particular track that we have selected, or the particular event that we have selected. So we can see various controls for our audio track. Time stretch is on here. We can choose the time stretch mode and a variety of different controls which are beyond the scope of this tutorial. We also can see our fader with controls for mute and solo. These are going to work along with the mute and solo and other controls that we have in our track column here. So you can see as I solo, then we're soloing on the track. So we can do this in either place. We then have our fader for level control. Holding Alt or Control and clicking is going to take that back to the default. We can come to the inserts and say type in EQ. I'll press enter, and we can add different effects and processing to our track like so. I'll click on the X to hide that. If I'd like to view it again, then I can double click on that header for the Pro EQ. Close that out. If I'd like to remove it, we can click on this downward facing arrow and remove like so. We can set up our sends here, and then down at the bottom, there's 3 different panels here actually. So, and between each of them we have this little border, and if I hover, we have these double arrows that appear, and I can resize, and we'll go ahead and pull this up a bit so we can see the bottom a little bit better. Now these controls are going to change depending on the event that we have selected. So since we just have one event here, then we're going to see its controls. We can see things like its file, tempo. We can see the start and end position. We can transpose that event. We can tune it in sense. We can adjust its gain, introduce a fade. So if I left click and hold here, then we can see at the beginning of our audio event, we now have a fade that's been introduced. When I hover over this event, we can see these little handles that appear, and I can also grab those and pull those back. We can see that the fade in is not quite taken back. Let's hold control and click on that. We have fade out. So if I left click, hold, and drag up, we can see that that fade out is now being introduced to the end. Let's left click and hold on that handle and pull that back out. We can see that that is taken back to 0 seconds. So a variety of different options here, but we're just talking about navigation and finding out where everything is. So we'll go ahead and pull this back down, and we'll go ahead and click on the eye to hide that inspector. Now we have this little hamburger button here, and this is going to show our track list. So this is going to be useful if we have a song with a ton of different tracks, say 50, 60, 100 tracks. We're going to see them all listed here, and we can manage those tracks from this area. We can click and expand out our automation envelopes for the audio track and do some other management here. We can click on these circles to hide the different tracks that we have, but we'll go ahead and close this out. And now that we have a couple of tracks added, let's come down to the bottom right hand corner again, and let's click on the mix console. We can hover at the top here and pull this up like so. We can also click on the arrow to detach this. So if we had a second monitor, we could drag that over there. Then clicking on this center button, we can make that full screen if we'd really like to work on our mix with a larger view. Coming to the top right, we can click on this downward facing arrow and reattach that. And just as we can resize and detach this, we can do the same with our edit view that we saw a moment ago. So if I click on edit, then we can see this here, resize. We also have a upward facing arrow here, so we could detach and make this full screen. I think that that full screen view is really useful for when you're working on MIDI here. So I'll again click on this upward facing arrow. And now we have this really large view for working with MIDI. If I hold Control and use my mouse wheel, then I can really zoom in, and then we can double click to add our notes. These are going to be added based on the quantized value that we have selected here. So if I click on that and change this to, say, quarter note, we can see that our grid changes. And if I double click, now we're adding our MIDI notes based on the new setting of quarter notes. So this larger view is really nice for working with MIDI. Down at the bottom, we have our automation lane. We can access, or parameter automation lane. We can access our velocity controls. Hovering, we have this pointer finger and I can adjust its velocity. We have note controller, sound variations, and so on. Again, beyond the scope of this tutorial, but just know that these are here. If you're not seeing this, you can click on this little mountain range looking icon to show and hide that. If you'd like to have more lanes, then we can click on the plus and then continue to add as many as we'd need, and then we can make adjustments to these parameters in relation to each other. Clicking on the minus, we're going to remove those out. Okay, let's go ahead and reattach this by clicking on the downward facing arrow, and we'll close out that edit view. Now let's come to the top of our track column here, because there are some global track controls that are available here. So if we click on this button, the global track visibility button, we have a drop-down menu that appears and we can add different global tracks. So if I were to click on this, then we can add a second ruler and we can choose what it's going to display. So by default, that's going to be on seconds, but we can also choose samples, bars, or frames. Okay, now when we click on this, we have this drop-down menu, but just know that if I hover at the edge of our track column, we have the double arrows and I can pull this to the right, and then we can see all of our global track sections here. So this is our marker track where we can add markers, and we can see the start markers here. If I click in the ruler and position that at bar 3 and then click on the plus, now we can see we add an additional marker there. We could double click on that and rename it. Okay, let's actually pull this back and we'll just use this drop down menu. Here we've got our chord track, then we've got our arranger track. If I double click, then we can see that intro has been added. If I hover at the edge, then I can click and expand that out. If I double click here, we then add another, which is labeled as verse. If I right click on this, then I can double click and we can rename this to be whatever we like, as well as a variety of other options there. Now, if I were to, let's change the color of this by clicking here. I'll just change that to that red. If I were to left click and hold, then anything that's within this range for the verse is going to be moved to another area of our song, wherever we drag that to. But let's go ahead and Control Z. But just know that you can add the arranger track, which can help you with, as the name implies, arranging your song. Okay, so next in line, we have a lyric track. We then have our video track. So if we import video, we can see thumbnails of our video that we brought in here. We then have our time signature track. So if I were to come to bar 5, let's click there in the ruler, and I'll click on the plus. We can then insert time signature, and let's click on OK. Actually, we'll double click. Let's put in 3/4. Okay, so now our song is going to switch to 3/4 time at this point. If we'd like to remove that out, we would need to position our playback cursor here at bar 5, and I'll click on the minus. We can see that that's been removed. Now, finally, we have our tempo track. So with our playback cursor set to 6 by clicking in the ruler, I'm going to click on the plus to add a point here, and I'm going to click in this field, and let's just put in 90. Let's press enter. So now we can see that our song is changing to 90 beats per minute here. Let's go ahead and click on the minus to remove these out. We'll click on bar 6 to take that out. Well, let's actually double click on that point, select it, and backspace. Well, I'm trying to remove this. We'll just put in 140. Actually, let's Control Z. Okay, now we're back to our original 140 for the song. And let's go ahead and remove these global tracks out of here. And let's make our way to the bottom and take a brief look at some of these transport controls. Now, of course, we've got play, stop, record. And over to the left, we have MIDI. So if you're using your MIDI controller, this is going to display information coming in. It's a good area to look to troubleshoot. If your instruments are not being triggered when your MIDI keyboard is connected. If I click on the word MIDI, then we have this MIDI monitor that's going to display information coming in from your controller. We then have the sample rate for our song. If I click on that, we can come here and change the sample rate for our song. We then have how much time we have left to record audio on our system. We have the position of our playback cursor. Here is in seconds, here is in bars. We have rewind, fast forward. These outer arrows are going to jump to the markers that we may have set up in our song. These markers, these arrows on the outside. If we click on this arrow with the vertical line, that's going to take us back to the beginning of the song. But we can also just press the comma key on our QWERTY keyboard to accomplish the same thing. We then have our loop here to activate. So if I click once to select this event, let's just put that at the beginning of bar 6. I'll press P as in Paul. That is going to set our loop region around this event. And now when I click on this, that's going to activate this loop. So now it's just going to keep playing this back over and over. If I press the /, then that's going to turn the loop on and off as well. Now here is the position of our loop markers, the left and right. That's going to be this, the left marker and the right marker. So as I move this, then this is going to update down below. We then have some sync controls and a variety of other controls. This is our metronome. So if you need a click track, you can click on that to turn it on. Clicking on the wrench is going to take us to our metronome setup where we can choose different sounds for our accent, our beat, and offbeat if we choose to use one. This is the level controls for those. We can click on these downward facing arrows to choose the different sounds or choose different sounds for our accent, beat, and offbeat if we'd like. We can store a preset or load a preset. From there, here we've got pre-count and how many bars the pre-count will be for. And then moving on, we have our time signature. Clicking here, we can make a different selection like so. We then have the key, so we can set up a key for our song. So if I wanted to put in G, now that is in G. If I click on that again, we would click in a blank area to set that back to nothing here. This is our global transpose. So if I were to say put in 2 here, then this is going to transpose any tracks that we have set to pay attention to this global transpose by 2 semitones. But let's go ahead and put in 0 and put that back to the default. And then here we have our song tempo. We can click once. Let's put in 120. So anyhow, I have issues with my number key. So we will undo and just put that back to 140. We then have access to a level control. This is our main out here. So if I click on the mix button here to open up our mix console, take note of our main out, that fader. These two work in tandem with each other. And as we've already seen, if I hold control and click, that's going to take it back to the default of 0 dB. Then here we have a stereo and mono control. So if we click on this, then we have this single red circle, which is going to put our song in mono. We can see that that's available here as well. So if you want to check your mix in mono, this is a convenient area here or here on our main if we have the mix console open, where we can make the switch between stereo and mono like so. Let's go ahead and close that mix console out, and we will come back to our browser And we've already taken a look at how we can simply left click, hold, and drag instruments in, and our instrument track is already created. Now, if we'd like to add effects, we saw how we could do that within the inspector window by clicking on the plus. But if our inspector isn't closed, then we can come here. Let's expand out the personas. And let's just say we want to put an auto filter on this recording. We can just simply drag that on top of the track like so. Release the left mouse, and now that has been added. And this let's monitoring, and then we can see that I'm now recording audio. This is coming from the we can change a preset on my laptop. Let's take this out of monitoring. And so that's a little bit funky sounding on this vocal, but you get the idea. Now, if we close this out and we like to access its parameters again, we can of course click on the eye to access the inspector, and we have our auto filter here. Double clicking on its header will open that up. Now, if I were to single click on this, then we have micro controls that are going to be available. These are usually kind of the most useful controls that are going to be accessible without having to double click on the header to open up the device itself. Single clicking, we close that out again. Now, if I were to, let's close out the inspector, open up the mix console, just know that we can also access our effects here after we've added by double clicking on the header, as we saw in the inspector. And we can access the devices. Single clicking, we access that micro view. Single click again to hide it. Now, if we come to our My Tie and click on the plus, this is another way that we can add effects. So if I type in REV, we've got our search results for reverbs. I can click on that room reverb, and now we've added reverb to our My Tie virtual instrument. We can then close that out. And again, single clicking, we have this micro view. Let's hover at this border for our sends and left click, hold, and pull that down. So then we can access some things like room size, the pre-delay, and so on for our room reverb. And we'll go ahead and close out the mix console, come back to our browser. Now, by default, the effects are going to be sorted by vendor, and we can choose how these will be sorted up at the top here. So if we were to choose flat, then we can basically see all of our effects and their thumbnails like so. If we don't want to see thumbnails, we can click on this button here to hide those like so. Now, if we choose folder, then we can see these are grouped by type. So we have analysis, delay, distortion, dynamics, and so on. Then the vendor is the default view. Then we have type, which is going to sort by the native effects that are included with Studio One. Then we have clap devices and VST3 devices. But I'm going to put this back to the default of vendor. Let's come to our loops. And then, so a lot of the students that I work with have problems finding loops that they are looking for. So the important thing to keep in mind about your loops is the sort section here at the top. So for me, generally, I find useful to have instrument set here. So if I'm looking for drums, then when this is set to instrument, these are all in alpha order. So then we have drums here. Now, this next field is going to determine how things are sorted once we click on the disclosure arrow and expand this out. So if I click on this, then it says style, so we can see electronic, hip hop, house, and so on. This third one is going to be what is sorted when we click on this next disclosure arrow. So if I click on this, then we see loop and one shot. So that's the character. If I were to change this to, say, type, then you can see that this is going to change to display the type. Okay, so you could spend a lot of time, and I'd recommend taking time if you actually work with loops to understand how these works, to help you more quickly find what you're looking for. And let's go ahead and expand this out by clicking. We can also use our arrows on the QWERTY keyboard. So if I down arrow, we can use down arrow and up arrow to navigate. If I right arrow, well, then we expand that folder out, down arrow, right arrow. Now if I down arrow, and then now that we actually have a loop selected, we have an information pane down at the bottom where we can see the actual waveform for this loop, which is actually looks more like a one shot. We can double click to start the audition, and once we double click, down arrow, everything is going to be playing back from this point on, unless we click on the stop button there If we'd like for things to loop, we can click on that. Now if I double click, then as you imagine, we're going to loop that. We have a stop button to stop playback here. And we also have this little metronome icon. So when this is engaged, our loops, particularly if it's not a one shot, it's going to play back to the song tempo that we have set here. So this loop here is selected. We can see in the title it's 100 beats per minute. We can also see that in the information pane, 100 beats per minute. But when we're auditioning this, it's going to play back at 140. So if I happen to be looking for a loop, I will play my song back and then I'll start auditioning these with this engaged so that I can hear the loops and how they'll sound related to the tempo of my song, and they'll match up to the tempo of what's playing back in my song. Then finally, we have a little volume control for our auditioning. Now let's go ahead and left arrow to collapse these folders and close all of these out. We'll then move over to the files. And then here, if I come to the top, we can access our system directory. If you have external drives with sample libraries, then you can access those here. And then here we have Studio One, where you can access, if you create your own presets and templates, then you can access all of those here. Okay, so here if I come to the presets, user presets, then we can access some user presets that have been created, that we've done ourselves. And then here I have a sample library. I've added this tab myself. This takes me directly to my personal library of samples. So if I were to say, click on this drum samples to expand this out, and let's right click on the sound iron, I can then come down to the bottom where we have new tab from here. And then now that's been added up at the top. So then I can immediately navigate to that sound iron folder. If we'd like to remove it, I can right click and then choose Close Tab. Now next we have our cloud, and we'll actually just skip over this, as well as the shop. Then we have our pool. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the tutorial, this is going to be where all of our recordings are going to be restored. So here we can see that vocal that I recorded, which is here. And so if I actually left click hold and delete that out by pressing delete, notice it's still here within our pool. So I could just left click hold and drag that back in. This is the initial recording before I increase the gain. Okay, so while it's highlighted, press delete. If I come to the second one, okay, so actually this is from where I cut it. Okay, so let's bring this top one back in, and I'll come to this handle at the top and just pull this back up again. Okay, so let's come back to this little house icon. Now at the bottom, we can click on this button to re-index presets if we made any changes. So say let's come back to the files again, Studio One, and say we've maybe deleted some presets in here. You may need to come to the house icon and re-index so that Studio One will update itself and see what's been changed. Then at the bottom we have Plugin Manager, so we can open up this window to manage all of our plugins. We can see everything that's installed. We can click on these circles to hide any plugins that we do not want to see in our browser. We can filter by type, like so. We can also filter by vendor. We can choose how the plugins will be shown within our browser here, which ones will show up first. So the way I have this set up is that clap plugins. If I install a plugin and it has a clap version, a VST3 version, and a VST2, then it's going to display the clap version. That's going to be prioritized first. And since I have this checked, then we should not see these other two, or at the very least, we will not see the VST2. Anything that's been blocked is going to be shown here, and we can click on the reset button here to reset those. Okay, let's go ahead and close this out. And we'll actually come back to the track column because I want to mention this wrench icon. If you're coming from another DAW and you're a little bit frustrated that Studio One behaves differently and you want it to behave more like the DAW you're coming from, this wrench icon can be a gold mine full of settings here. So for instance, the locate when clicked in empty space. I actually saw someone leave a comment that they could not use Studio One because when they clicked in an empty area, the playback cursor did not change its position. To me, it seems like a small thing not to use a DAW, but hey, people have their preferences. But it's also located here. Is that it? No, that's actually not it. I thought there was a button for that here as well. But anyhow, coming here, there's a ton of different stuff here. Audio input follows selection. We can colorize our track controls like so. Let's go ahead and take that off. We can show track notes if we'd like to add notes to our tracks. We can show track icons. So if I click on that, then we have these blank areas here. And if I click on that, then we can say add icons for our tracks. Clicking again, I can reset that to clear it out. We can also hover at the border and resize that like so. Let's come back to the wrench, and I'll go ahead and take that off. And at the bottom, we have some settings for audio here. Ignore plugin latency, monitoring follows record, and monitoring mutes playback tape style. So check this area out if you're looking for Studio One to change some of its behaviors and how it functions when you're working in it. Now, if I were to come to the mix console, we also have a wrench icon here, which is going to change some of its behaviors and its view. So for instance, we can add channel notes here. We can see we now have an area for adding notes like that. We can add channel icons like we saw. Okay, for the tracks, let's come back to the wrench, take that off. We can show VCA connections, group assignments. So a lot of different options here. Colorize our channel strips. So now these can be more easily identifiable if you prefer to see them colored. At the top, we can determine how our channels will be displayed horizontally. So keeping effects channels to the right, bus channels to the right, and so on. Okay, now let's close out our browser and just maybe wrap up things with taking a look how we can customize the view of the mix console. And we'll go ahead and pull this up a little bit. Let's come down and hover near our sends. We see that single arrow changes to doubles. We'll pull up our sends. Now, over to the left-hand side at the bottom, this is how we can really change what is displaying in our mix console. So up at the top, when we hover, we see that says small and large. So by default, we're in the large view. Our inserts and sends are shown at the top of our channel. But if I click on this, then those go away and they are replaced with a little button here where we can click on this to open up a side panel and then access our inserts and sends like so. So we can expand that out. So if you prefer to work like this, that is available. Clicking again, we return to the large view. Now next in line, we then have a narrow and normal view. By default, we're in narrow or normal. So this is our normal view, but if I click on this, this can be useful if you have a song with a large track or channel count and you want to see this narrow view with the meters shown at the top. Clicking again, we change back to the normal view. Now below that, we can view the inputs. These basically represent the physical inputs on our audio interface. This basically is just the left and right microphones built into my laptop screen, and this is both of them combined into a stereo channel. So we can adjust gain here, although I never do, but if you're using a dynamic mic, for instance, that you're struggling to get enough level from, then you can access this panel and take up the gain here. Any inserts that you add here are going to be, those effects will be printed to your recording and you cannot remove them. So if you were to put it, say, EQ or compression on these inserts, it's going to be printed to your audio here and you cannot remove it. Versus when we add them here to the channels, they're going to be used in real time and we can always make adjustments to the parameters or take them off if we'd like. Okay, so that's our inputs. Then here we have outputs. So if you have an interface that has multiple outs and you're making use of those, say for surround sound, then notice we have this black vertical bar that appears, and if I hover, we would see our outputs show up here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and hide that. We can see that that black vertical line is now gone. Now next we have our scenes. So we can set up scenes for our mix console if we'd like. I actually have a tutorial on this, so I'll leave a link if you'd like to learn more about that. And let's hide that. We skipped over this one here. This is going to be our instrument rack or external devices. So any MIDI keyboards or controllers that we've set up, we can see them here. And my MPK is not connected at the moment. But if I double click on the QWERTY keyboard, then that's going to open that up. If I double click here, that would open up some controls for our MPK where we can make some adjustments to it. So that's our instrument or external devices. Now here is our instrument rack, and that's going to show here. So any virtual instruments that we've added are going to be listed here. So let's come to the browse, scroll down in our arrange view, come to the instruments. I will come to the UHE. Let's drag in a hive, put that below our audio track, and that's been added. We'll go ahead and close that out as well as our browser. So we can see our hive is listed here. We have an instrument track that's been added and a channel for its audio. Okay, if we'd like to see it again, we can click on the keyboard icon here. Or, as we saw earlier, the keyboard icon on our instrument track. If I were to double click on the header for the hive, then we can open it up here as well. Clicking on the downward facing arrow, we have some other options for managing that device, including removing it, disabling it, and so on. So that's our instrument rack. Now we've already taken a look at the scenes. Here is our groups. So that's going to open up a panel for managing channels that we've grouped together. And then we have our channel list, which is showing by default with that hamburger button. And this we can use to manage what we're seeing for the channels within our console, like so. And a couple final miscellaneous things. Back at our track column here, we have this little button that we can click to change the view of our tracks to an automation view. We can see that those have now been changed, and we can click on this to add automation. That's kind of a longer way to do it, but just know that you can do that by clicking here. We can also press A on our QWERTY keyboard, and this kind of gets some of my students into trouble. I've gotten emails from students saying, hey, my track column view changed and I don't know what I did. Well, if you press A on your QWERTY keyboard, then that's going to change that view there. Now, if you would like to add automation, so say for our Mai Tai, an easy way would be to say if we wanted to add automation for our filter cutoff, I can click on this. We can see that cutoff is now populated here. I can click on the A, and then now that filter cutoff has been added to the track here. And then I can come here and add some points like so and make some adjustments to the automation. When I play this back, we can see, and then we can see that I'm now recording. That automation has been added. I could also click on the button here and change this to touch, and then let's press play. And you could see, if you notice the track, that automation is being added like so. Okay, closing this out, we can see how that's been added. Okay, so I'm going to press A twice to kind of toggle that back to our normal view. And the last thing we'll take a look at is here all the way at the end we have a scratch pad. So if you ever want to experiment or store some things in this area here, this is going to be a separate arrange view where we can drag different items. We can experiment with things here and then pull them back into our song, even creating a new track after we've made some adjustments. So just know that that is available here as well. And some additional controls show up once that has been open. We can delete that out like so, and we're back to our normal view. Okay, so this has been a look at the layout and navigation for the song page within Studio One. I hope it's been useful. And again, if you'd like to speed up your learning curve for Studio One and you're interested in working with me directly over Zoom, check out the link below or the description area of this video. Otherwise, I hope to see you in the next tutorial.